Hello, I am Dolmo, and this is a developer commentary for a custom level that I created for Black Mesa called Imposter. Imposter was created for a Halloween-themed mapping competition called Escape from Black Mesa, which was hosted by LambdaGeneration, Crowbar Collective, and ModDB. In this video, I will be doing a full walkthrough of the level. I'll be discussing some of the things that went well, and I'll also be addressing some of the criticism that the level received and talking about some of the things that didn't go as well. The Escape from Black Mesa competition started on the 20th of September and finished on the 18th of October 2022. Imposter was started on the 23rd of September, so about 3 days after the competition opened. And as I mentioned, the theme was Halloween, so the aim for the contestants was to create a level that had an eerie, creepy, unnerving atmosphere. So it wasn't making a level that was kind of full horror with lots of jump scares and lots of gruesome things to look at. It was more just creating a eerie, unnerving environment. And I'll talk about how I went about trying to do that, trying to create a premise and a plot. And I'll also be talking through, the combat decisions I made and also the puzzles and the environment. So it's going to be a very long video and I'll be spending a lot of time in each area discussing all the different aspects of it. But with that being said, let us begin. So to begin, I wanted to create a very impactful intro to the level. I wanted it to be a very memorable intro, and I did that by contrasting this happy elevator music against the kind of eerie theme of the level. So this intro was part of what would have become the premise for this entire mod. When I first started making it, I made one of the later lobby areas first to kind of get me into the mood for mapping, basically, again, because it'd been quite a while since I'd last created a map. The last time I released a map was DM Coolant, which was a deathmatch map for Black Mesa last year in 2021. So after I'd created that area, I wanted to come up with this premise of what this map would be about, and this elevator intro would have been the kind of groundwork for that. So as you heard, there was something knocking on the top of the elevator. Well, I wanted this thing that was knocking to be unknown, and this thing would be chasing you or following you throughout the level for the entire time, and you'd hear it growl, and you'd hear the footsteps of it, and it would be kind of following you, and then halfway through the mod you would then have to start hunting it down, but you wouldn't know what it was, and that would kind of make it eerie and scary. But the difficulty I had was knowing what that was. I was thinking, it might be the Gargantua or the Gonarch or something like that. There's only so many NPCs that I could have chosen, and I kind of really struggled to know what it could be and make an impact, because at the end of this idea I wanted it to be revealed as to what it was, and that reveal would have had to have been really big. So my next concept was to have this creature being a head crab, and it's the door would open at the end, and then there was this head crab. That's been what's causing all this fear and uneasiness throughout the whole mod. But that kind of seemed a really difficult concept to pull off. It's the same concept, but just with kind of a more comedic ending. So I quickly abandoned this idea, but I kept the intro in because I think it is a good kind of impactful intro. It kind of really sets the mod going on a good, in a good direction for the Halloween theme and the eerie theme. This concept of me coming up with an idea and then implementing a little bit of it and then not implementing it fully is something you will see throughout the rest of this level. As I play through it, I'll be discussing other ideas that I had, and I think it's fair to say that this level is the most incoherent level I have ever created. And I'm not saying that from a place of low self-esteem or something like that, but just with the amount of, or the number of ideas that I'd come up with and tried to implement and, you know, didn't implement fully, it kind of creates this, it's almost disjointed, you know, the different areas of this level. Especially, you know, going from the kind of horror elements early on in this level to kind of the more normal, traditional Black Mesa Half-Life gameplay later on. It does create a very incoherent level. But I'll talk more about that as we go on. This, you know, elevator was fully dark when I, you know, was developing it because I hadn't placed the cube maps. But when I placed the cube maps, which are kind of to help with reflections, it kind of messes up a lot of the lighting, so it doesn't have quite the same impact. But unfortunately, I ran out of time and I wasn't able to fix it, so it kind of does look a bit strange in the dark. But that's alright. And I did want kind of the... I like the fact it doesn't land fully parallel with the ground. I think that's quite an interesting concept. And another reason why I did that is to, you know, kind of really frame this next section. You know, and that's why I placed the Tram timetable board there. I'll play through it and then talk over it after. But this is kind of this was the start of the next premise of the level that I had. After I abandoned the scary creature idea, the unknown creature, this was the next idea that I had. What if, at the very, very start of the mod, this ragdoll of Gordon Freeman fell from the sky? You know, it's like, as the player, we think we're Gordon Freeman, but, you know, here's Gordon Freeman here. You know, are we the real Gordon Freeman? Are they the real Gordon Freeman? And this was where the concept of imposter came from. It was the whole concept of questioning who was the real Gordon Freeman. And this is another idea that I had that I didn't fully deliver upon. And there were many reasons for that. And we'll see as we go along as to why I didn't fully incorporate that. But this was supposed to be a bigger aspect of the level. But I think it's important at the start to kind of frame the concept. And as I was speaking about framing the environment, because this room was very, you know, the placement of objects was very calculated, because I wanted the player to acknowledge, you know, this Gordon Freeman ragdoll. I had to really think about the location of items. So initially, just when I blocked out the level, this door was the exit, or the way out, but it was kind of easy for the player to, you know, just run past there. Because one thing I've noticed when people have been playing through my levels and other levels is they run through them, some players, not all players, some players run through them very, very quickly, and they don't acknowledge most things. They only take in about 20% of the content. So I kind of wanted every player to acknowledge, you know, what's going on here. So in order to do that, as I said, I placed the Tram timetable board there. It's, you know, got the blue screens. It really highlights this area. And I wanted it to be visible as soon as these elevator doors opened. And I also had the combat sounds playing and the grenades and all that, just to kind of give a sense that there's a battle going on, and they'll continue to loop. The sounds will continue to loop throughout the time that you're in the elevator and, you know, in this corridor. And that would kind of stage the death of Gordon Freeman over there. This corridor actually starts off kind of wider, and then what I did is I kind of narrowed it in order to keep this area as the main focal point for the player to look at. And in this between these two walls, this is where the trigger is to make the ragdoll fall. So when the player gets to this point, their focus is on this area, and they can see the ragdoll falling, and every player that plays kind of hopefully acknowledges this. If this tram timetable thing wasn't here, then the exit door would be visible, and that might become the focal point for the player. So the player would see the door and think, oh, that's where I need to go, and then they wouldn't, I don't know, or maybe they would miss the ragdoll, or their mind would be taken to, let's get through the door. So that was kind of my concept behind this. And I also added in the voice lines of the Marines to kind of just drive home the concept of Gordon Freeman being slaughtered. One of the problems I had was I put this tram timetable here, and I realised this isn't actually, like the transit system. This is just a normal lobby area. So that's why I didn't remove the door that was initially the exit. I just placed this, sign here to make you think, oh, this, the transit system platforms right through here, and this is just like a waiting area. That was kind of one problem I had, but I kind of solved just by putting the sign there. I could have kind of detailed through this door, but the space between here and another area, it's not very big, and it would also make the map less optimized. I kind of really wanted to make this map as optimized as possible, and so it can run on basically any machine. So yeah, the player has to pick up the crowbar to progress through this door, and yeah, this wooden board was just placed here, so the player had to pick up the crowbar and acknowledge that they're picking up the crowbar. Obviously the crowbar plays into this imposter theme, or kind of the imposter theme that I wanted to incorporate. I quite like the fact Gordon Freeman strikes a very over-the-top pose. That wasn't intentional, that's just the way he happens to fall each time. But this wooden board also kind of acts as a teaching mechanic. Now, I don't for one second believe anyone who played this level, this was their first level for Black Mesa that they'd played, or Half-Life, or anything like that. But when I create levels, I always like to create them as if, or for players that maybe are playing Half-Life or Black Mesa levels for the first time. I always like to accommodate for new players and incorporate good gameplay for them and good teaching mechanics. So I don't believe that anyone needed to be taught how to do that, but it was just kind of both so the player picked up the crowbar and also to kind of teach them that they can break things. And these charred ragdolls were placed just to kind of, because I realised there wasn't a lot of Halloween stuff involved and eerie stuff, so I placed them with the helmets to make people, speculate, oh, they must have been guards. Yeah, so let's continue on. As I said, I'll spend a lot of time on each area, kind of going through each individual part. Now, when I create levels, I like to add areas off the beaten track for players to explore. I don't just like one linear path. And this is something Half-Life did, and it's something a lot of kind of first-person linear games do, is they give the player somewhere else to explore and put things for the player to find there to reward the player for exploring the level and giving up their time to play, basically, because, levels can be very linear and you can just run from one room to another. It goes room, corridor, and that's something I really, as much as corridors are very important for connecting rooms, it's something I kind of want to avoid. I want to give the player more to explore. So that's what I did here. Obviously, this is actually literally room, corridor, room, but I placed the main route to go up these stairs, and it kind of, if you look up there, you can see, this very probably is the way to go. Most players just assume this is the way to go. And if you look this way, it doesn't really look like the main route. I tried to make it as, just not like the way to go. This is where you can actually find interesting things. So I always like to give the player useful things, which, batteries are very useful to the player. It's one of the few useful things you can give to players in Half-Life games, like Half-Life, Black Mesa, Half-Life 2, stuff like that. Another thing I did is, one thing I did when I created Cosmonaut for Half-Life 2, Episode 2, back in 2018 and 2019, is I put these golden gnomes around the levels for players to find. And people really liked these golden gnomes and the concept of finding the gnomes, and some people made videos and there were discussions about them. So I really wanted to do that here, because I know people like to find things that isn't just, the useful stuff like batteries. And I thought, seeing as this is kind of a Halloween non-serious competition, I thought I'd add in these artifacts, these spinning Black Mesa artifacts. And you really don't get anything for collecting them. The reward is the fact you collect all 6 of them, and at the end it says you collected all 6 artifacts. I'm not sure if this is really in the spirit of the Half-Life design principles, but at the end of the day, as I said, it's kind of a not very serious competition, kind of a more fictional Halloween map. So I thought, I might as well add it in. So that was something else that I was able to hide in these areas that are off the beaten track. And this is one of these other areas. This was actually the entrance to the room before I changed it around. You know how I talked about the moving or adding the tram timetable and all that stuff. Well, this initially was a bigger door, and this is where the transit system door somewhere over there, and I had it connected here. But I kept it in just because it kind of worked with the room, and I was able to put this battery and these charred rag dolls down here for more Halloween focused environments. I know it sounds like, I'm not saying charred rag dolls equates to good Halloween gameplay. In fact, that's not the case, but I was kind of just trying to find as much stuff as possible to add in a Halloween theme, because I was missing the mark a lot with that, and I'll speak more about that later. With this room, I really wanted to work with colour. Add lots of colourful things in, so you've got the reds and the blues of the signs and the drinks, the vending machines, which I really like. They do create good colour. The blueness of the door, which I kind of wanted to stand out, as that's the door we will be taking out. And also the green of the security station. This part of the level is the start of a loop that the player will have to take. As you can see in here, you can see the weapons and the ammo to collect. The reason why creating loops and reusing areas and having the player explore other areas and levels is that you want to squeeze as much gameplay out of environments as possible, and having the player visit an area once and then have them visit it again but in a different context, you can really get a lot of gameplay from that, and that's something I would really encourage level designers to do. Now, in this regard, I don't think I used that concept particularly well, but it just meant that I could get a lot of gameplay out without having to create extra environments. So this is the start of that loop. and then you've got this kind of creepy, unnerving atmosphere. I think this part of the mod is where that creepy atmosphere comes in best, because there's very few sounds. There's obviously the sound of the water, or the drinks machine, and also the radio, and soft ambient sound. I used soundscapes, as you do when making source levels, but I wanted the feeling of complete isolation, like there's no one here. And then we get to the lobby. Now I'll speak about this in a minute. I want to draw your attention to this area here. As you see over there, you can see the Gordon Freeman ragdoll. This was an attempt at me trying to continue on the imposter premise, the imposter storyline. And the idea was that we'd continue to see ghosts or ragdolls of Gordon Freeman throughout the mod. And this would be kind of unnerving to the player. Incidentally, if you go back to the transit system lobby area, the ragdoll that fell from the sky is gone. And I thought that's something nice for players to, who bother to go back there. They'd be kind of a bit unnerved about that. At least that's what I thought when creating it. In reality, I think it's it's not a very good incorporation of the theme, but I only added in one more ragdoll after this, and it's long at the end. So I didn't do a good job of keeping the theme going. And that's where my map wasn't as good as some other maps that even ranked below this map. They actually incorporated their horror themes consistently. I didn't do that. But I wanted this to kind of be just a nice, unnerving thing for players to look at. Just a bit of trivia about this area. I mentioned before that this was the first area that I created when I made this level. And this lobby was created just to get me back into mapping. It'd been a while since I'd created a level. I've been programming video games over the summer and hadn't really done much mapping. So I decided I'd kind of start creating a lobby area just to get me into the mood. And I quite like this area. And when I designed it, I didn't design it for anything in particular, for any type of gameplay. And I kind of just jammed the gameplay into it, which isn't a good idea, but I was able to adjust it very easily. It's not, as much as it looks big, it's not big enough so that it was difficult to change. And one thing I was able to do was add this door here and add the exit directly in front of the player. So, when I designed this bit, I designed it so the player was facing the exit and it was clear that that is where they had to go. Obviously, I put the green light there. I also added in this the electrical box and the wire going to this other box, and I was hoping this would give the player the hint that they would have to open this exit door. These crates act as a soft barrier. Soft barriers are objects and items that psychologically stop the player from going to a certain area. Fundamentally. If they weren't here, the player might be tempted to run from here and just go straight round here, and that door is where we need to go to progress up to the upper catwalk. I placed these crates so that they're kind of facing this way, blocking the player off, so most players, when they get to this lobby area, would be forced into kind of this area, and I wanted the player to explore, because I wanted to keep up this eerie atmosphere. It's completely quiet, there's no living thing, there's no NPC you can see, and that's kind of initially what I wanted, but I'll talk about how that kind of dissolved, and I decided to make a few decisions to change that may have affected the quality of the level. Another attempt at horror. That phone kind of rings randomly. There's a few kind of triggers I placed around, but that was one of the last things I added when I realised my the horror of the horror elements weren't really there, and it was a Halloween themed map. Another thing I wanted to draw the player's attention to here was the red light in the upper catwalk in this door, which is where the player will have to get through to go over here. So I tried to frame each location using lights. Light is a good way of drawing the player's attention. It's not the only way of drawing the player's attention to areas, but I think in this context it was the easiest. But for instance, you could have, I don't know, a ceiling tile falling, or an object moving or something like that to draw the player's attention. So there's different ways of doing it, but in this regard I just used kind of coloured lights to show the player the points of interest in this lobby, to make it clear where the player was going. This office area that you can see here was just another side area for the player to explore. There's no reason to have it, but it kind of creates this, creates more for the player to explore. And what I did here is I introduced a concept that I continued to introduce throughout the rest of this level, and that's giving the player multiple routes to go, but not really showing the player what the consequences of taking the routes are. So here we've got 2 doors, left and right, and which way the player goes is up to them. Now often it's a psychological thing. They don't make a conscious decision, so some players will come out here and walk around here, and if you're walking around here, you're more likely just to run straight forward. Other players will just go immediately into this door here, if they come here. So it's not as if they're facing here like I am now and going left or right. But with this instance, no matter which route you take, it leads to the same events occurring. So I'll go for this door. Randomly falling boxes just to unnerve the player. I'm not even sure many players saw it. And also head crab, which was initially I had 2 vents here, and the head crabs would start piling out of their great force, but this was kind of over the top. And at that time I wanted to continue keeping this eerie atmosphere of not very much happening, but just this creepy feeling of isolation and aloneness. If you enter through this door, there's boxes here that fall and a head crab spawns round here. So the same things happen, and there's nothing really else to find here other than another artifact. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't found all the artifacts. If you haven't, then I'll be spoiling the rest of them. Just because I don't think I ever made a video when I made Cosmonaut about where all the golden gnomes were, and people kept pestering me. People still pester me about where all the golden gnomes are, and I can't remember for that. So this could be a video, a definitive, here are the artifacts. I want to say a word about the environment and the location. So these levels are based off questionable ethics. Especially this room, this office area was inspired by the first map in questionable ethics. I think there's a security guard in it, and you kind of, it's kind of a circular room like this one. I thought when I created this lobby and the rest of the map, it would be easy and simple to create these labs and these kind of offices. And it was, but the issue is it's not very exciting to create a lot of these areas. So for instance, when I created the second map of Stalwart XT that I created with Jamaican Dave back in 2019. That environment was very interesting to create, and when I created DM Coolant last year in 2021, that was also, whilst it was kind of similar labs, it was a lot more varied. Creating these offices in the laboratories was not as exciting, and most of it was placing stuff on desks and kind of placing a lot of these communal sitting areas with TVs. You'll see there's a lot of them around here. But it did make it simple because of the time constraints I had when creating. Because obviously the contest ended on the 18th of October, and I worked full time, so I didn't have a lot of time for creating super detailed environments. So that's why I stuck with the lab theme. As you can see, there's no smoothing groups on these pillars because I kind of ran out of time, and that was kind of the last thing on my agenda. So I am sorry to those people who care about that. I am aware of smoothing groups, but I just didn't get round to adding them everywhere. You can actually hear, just a word on sound, you can hear these machines actually making a sound, and one of the ways you can play sounds, so you can use ambient generics, which are like sounds entities that you place, but you can also use soundscape positions where you have your file and you define the sound positions within the soundscape. So if you can hear, there's kind of an ambient sound. Well, along with that ambient sound, you can create object sounds and position them, where machines are or vents. And I started doing that for a few locations in this mod, but I kind of couldn't be bothered to place it anymore, and I still had some stuff to do, so I always intended to come back and place more around the level, but I just never got round to it. But it kind of works well with the theme of it being quiet and not a lot of sound. Yeah, but I kind of just ran out of time to place anymore, so this is one of the few instances of positional soundscape sounds. Okay, now we come into this kind of side lab room. Now, up until this point, there have been really no NPCs apart from the head crab that you meet in the offices. And for the majority of development, there was no NPCs up until we get to the, up there and along to the other security control room, where we will open this door up there. There was no NPCs, and because I really wanted to create this feeling of isolation, but I remembered back to Nostalgiaville Cosmonaut, which I created in 2018, at the start of 2018, and at the start of Cosmonaut, you crash land and then you explore the city. And whilst there are puzzles for you to do, there's no combat or anything like that. And a few judges and a few players said that, it felt like you weren't doing anything at all. There was nothing to do and it was boring. And that really did play on my mind when creating this. I thought, we haven't really been doing that much. There's just been a little bit of exploration, but there hasn't been anything to engage the player. And I always like to have the player always doing something, whether it be a puzzle, combat, something to look at, something to find. So, and this thought of, the judges might mark this map down for that, played on my mind. So I started, at the very end of development, I started adding in more combat encounters. And this was one of these combat encounters. I actually think this negatively impacted the map, because I think one of the judges, I can't remember who it was, but they said that they actually liked the feeling of isolation and the kind of quiet parts of the map more, and when the combat was added, it kind of detracted from that. And I feel like this is one of these instances where adding in these zombies doesn't really help the feeling of the map, if that makes sense, because obviously the Halloween eerie theme should have been the most important thing. as we see, we get given these flares. And I made sure to give the player a good amount of them to be able to burn all of the zombies. And it's a good thing to include other ways of dispatching of enemies. So a lot of the time in Half-Life games, it's exploding barrels and whatnot and flares. So when you include something like this, you want to be including it a lot more, but this is actually the only time in the level that flares are used. And as I said, it was added very late on in development, and it might have detracted from the from the feeling of the map. Here we have another side area just for the player to explore. To reward the player, I put these crates in to give the player some useful things if they needed it. Not that they really do, because there hasn't been much combat. And even when I designed this area, there wasn't any combat. So, I kind of felt like I was giving the player a lot of stuff and they weren't utilising it. And that's one of the reasons why I added these zombies in, that we've just seen. I also added in this artifact. I'm not sure if this is the one that people couldn't find, because I saw a few people commenting that there was only 5 or something, so I'm not sure if this was the hardest one to find. I kind of wanted it to be really hard to find, but again, it rewards players who explore, who give their time to this map. Another thing I wanted to do is I had all these barnacles over here initially, and when the player would walk in, there would be no barnacles, and they'd walk in, collect the items, and then the barnacles, their tongues would extend. Their tongues at the start wouldn't be extended. And then, they'd extend when the player got into the room. But for some reason, that functionality doesn't work. Or I couldn't get it to work in Black Mesa. Because there's this drop tongue function, I think, that you can call. And it just didn't seem to work. So I just placed them randomly here. And I did intend for these objects to be able to be picked up, but actually you can't pick them up because these shelves were actually just copied and pasted from DM Coolant, which was the deathmatch map I made. And all of the items there, because it's multiplayer, are static or aren't able to be moved. And I forgot to enable motion on them or make them physics props. So that was kind of an oversight that I actually only found when rehearsing. And it's funny, the sort of stuff you find after, it's released. Like, for instance, here, you could actually just walk right through this this railing, which is quite funny that I never found that. But it's something most, playtesters don't test, or you yourself don't check for. Anyway, now we come to what I would describe as a puzzle. It's not really a puzzle in the traditional sense that the player has to think about it for a long time, but it's just something to make the player engage with the level more than just pushing buttons. So as you can see, that it's obvious what's going to happen if the player goes under the door. They're obviously going to get crushed. And I tried to make it obvious that the the thing was malfunctioning, and I tried to use the light to highlight this area, not that it needed it. This grate was placed in order to show the player the solution to the problem, just to make it obvious what they had to do. So I'll go around and just go ahead and solve the problem. I did in this Hud Hint for the player to to help the player, but actually you can use E on the plug, or you can hit it with the crowbar. So I like to give the players many ways of solving a problem, and that was just one of them. You can pick it up, you can actually just carry this anywhere you want. There's no constraints, it can clip through the wall. That is fine. But as I said, the grate was to show the player the solution if you're standing on the other side. And on this side, you can see now that the door has stopped moving. You can hear it. I want to make it clear to the player what they're doing. So if the player pushes a button, pulls a lever, removes a plug, I want to make it clear to the player what they have done. And that was what this grate was for. So it's maybe not realistic, and it doesn't look that great. It is clear that I've just cut a bit out and put, a see-through grate here, but it is good for gameplay, and that's one area I think gameplay comes before environment. So yeah, I was also going to mention this puzzle. Initially when I designed it, this was the push crate puzzle. So you know how you get these big blue push crates in Black Mesa and Half-Life, and you can push them around. This is what the push crate puzzle was, but I moved it later on in the level because it was very difficult to push the crate, because the door would still be moving up and down, and the player would have to push, the crate underneath the door to stop it moving. It was difficult for the player to do that, and it was also difficult for me to get the logic right for that. So I moved the push crate puzzle later on and changed it around a bit and made it less original. So this is one of these areas I tried to keep as simple as possible in terms of detailing. I tried to make the things that were kind of important to the puzzle, highlighted with this, as I said. But another way to make areas interesting, instead of just placing props, is to, give more variation for the floor. So that's something I did here. Is I kind of, this floor could have easily have just been that texture for the, the entire floor. I did the same thing here, in that there's kind of variations in the floor. So that's just another way you can make your levels a bit more interesting. And this is stuff that players don't acknowledge. Players don't think, oh, that's a interesting floor. They actually just ignore it. But if it was just a plain floor, they're more likely to notice that. And the player has to crouch under the door again just to interact with the level instead of just running everywhere. I like, the player having to crouch under things, jump over things. Just creates variation for the player. So when the player leaves, this door, they're facing, the area they're going, so they can actually see the window that they will look out to open up this exit door. And hopefully by this point, I wanted the player to realise what they were going to do. I'd hope the moment they came out that door that they'd realise they needed to open the door. But, hopefully by this point they've definitely got it, so I kind of made it as clear and as simple as possible. In the initial design of this level, when I'd blocked it out and started to detail it, going through this door, this would have been the very first NPC encounter, and before I added in obviously the head crab over there and the zombies. And I was hoping this would take the player by surprise, not like shock or, shell shock or anything like that, but just, make the player surprised that there's actually another NPC. And it's actually a friendly NPC, and it's quite somewhat of a comedic encounter, as you'll see. And I'll talk you through why, because it's quite a complex encounter in terms of gameplay, but I tried to keep this room dark so it kind of shocked the player a bit.
Hey, over here. Freeman, right? I got a message for you. Make sure you don't... The hell is this?
So, as I said, it's a little bit comedic. It's a bit funny that he gets hit immediately and then Gibbs. There was a number of reasons for this encounter. The first was to play into the horror element, or the eerie element. Is that the fact that you've been alone, or at least in the initial design for the level, you were alone for the full time, and now there's suddenly this friendly NPC who's speaking to you. And I wanted to create the feeling of isolation by placing the guard behind, glass away from the player. And this is something that Bioshock 1 did quite well, is that whenever you met a friendly NPC in that game, you were always separated by some glass or, by a radio or something like that. And this creates a feeling of isolation. So that's one reason as to why I created this encounter. And this meant I could also create a puzzle for the player, or a kind of something for the player to think about, because I made it obvious the moment the player walks in the room that the door into this control room is blocked. And obviously a bit of storytelling is, I wanted to give the impression that the guard had blocked up the door to stop zombies and stuff getting through. That's why this crate's been placed here. So that's what I wanted. And obviously we cannot get into the room, so we need to find a way into the room. So having the zombie fall through the ceiling shows us the way into the room. And then now the puzzle is, how do we get there? This window also lets us see where we need to go, or the goal of this section of the map. Obviously we've been working towards opening the exit door, and I wanted to kind of make that clear by looking through this window. So this window serves a lot of different purposes. There is like a speaker here that I wanted the player to see, but the lighting seems to have broken it, and I didn't have time to fix it. Or there are other things to kind of fix. When you get to the end of development, you have to prioritize fixing some things over others, and that was just something I just didn't get around to fixing. These fences weren't always here. In fact, they were placed very late on in development because, as I said before, a lot of players just run through levels. They'll just run, they'd even run past this guy. They'd think, oh, this guy's talking. Who cares about that? They'd run around here, and I wanted to enclose the player in this zone so the player was focused on the zombie breaking through the vent, so they could see that, that's our entry point into the room. I made sure that the vent here was visible because, just so the player could at least see, oh, that's how we get in. Maybe if they didn't break this, although I think most players kind of understand that. Okay, so I added in this vent because of the fences, and there's been quite a bit of controversy behind adding vents into custom levels. In that, I'm not sure. I think people think they're very cliched, and they are. But because it's Half-Life, vents were a big part of Half-Life, and I don't mind adding in vents because it encourages the player to crouch, or the player has to crouch. They're at least doing something. I could have just had like a door that the player walked around, but it just makes it interesting and more enclosed. So this puzzle, again, I'll call it a puzzle. It's not a puzzle in that you spend an hour thinking about how to fix it, but just something for the player to do. I wanted to have the player jumping or figuring out a way of how to get up there. And I added in these HUD hints, as you can see on the right hand side. As I said earlier on in this video, I always like to design levels as if the players playing them will have never played a Half-Life or Black Mesa level before. But I was actually given some feedback personally that these HUD hints were actually helping the player too much and almost giving the solution to the players. And this is especially prevalent later on in the mod, in the kind of grenade lobbing section. And that these HUD hints weren't helpful, and they also, by this point in the mod, of course the player knows how to jump, because, we've done that already, so these HUD hints were actually detracting from the gameplay and the player's ability to think. And I actually somewhat agree with that now. Obviously, when I was designing it, I was kind of in this mindset of helping new players, but it does detract from the player being able to think and work out the solution from themselves. And I believe I've designed this puzzle well enough that no player would get stuck here because they didn't know how to jump. So my intention for this part was having the player jumping up here and then jumping across there like that. But actually, I found when I was rehearsing this video that you could just do that. And that wasn't found when, I guess, testing, because I think this shelf was placed here fairly late on, because if players are kind of not good at jumping or playing on kind of older hardware, it might be difficult to make this jump, especially because just doing a normal jump, you can't make it the full way. So I kind of made it a bit easier by placing the shelf. But at the end of the day, it's something I'm not going to remove, because obviously this crate was placed here to show that this gate couldn't open and to kind of play into the storyline. It also just gives players another, route up, multiple ways to solve the problem, which, I quite like. So now we eventually drop into the control room, which is a room I'm not very keen on. And there's a few reasons for that. So the first reason, or the main reason, is that I want the player to engage with this part of the level, with these levers, but I don't want the player to be able to leave right now. And, somehow the player has to leave this room eventually, but only after they've pulled these levers. And one thing I do not like when I design mods or when I play mods is when the player does something like push a button, pull a lever, something happens just by chance that allows the player to progress. So for instance, the player pushes a button and then over the other side of the room, a door opens that isn't connected to that button. So maybe the button was to open another door, but yet another door opens that isn't connected to it. I don't like that, but I couldn't come up with a solution in this particular instance for that. So instead I blocked up this door that you can't get through with these crates. Instead, that zombie that was here obviously knocks him down. I don't know why he comes down here, but then I make him disappear to kind of make it a bit spooky for players. Not really, but just to kind of make the player wonder where the zombie had gone. And I have a zombie opening this door and breaking the crates when the player has pulled the levers, which isn't ideal, and it's not something I'm proud of, but unfortunately that was just the way I solved this problem as a level designer. I also gave the player the revolver, the cowboy weapon, because I realised at this point the player didn't have any weapons and you were about to go and get the full weapon cache in the security room. So I gave them a revolver, which, isn't necessary, but I think it's good just for the player to find it. It also encourages the player to come up here and, as they're pulling the levers. Now, you might be wondering why there is 2 levers. And this is based on the principle that I want the player to look out of the window and be aware of what they are doing. If there was one lever, the player might come down here, pull the lever and then run away. Go and find the exit. But having 2 levers means that the player can pull one lever and they're looking outside, regardless if they pull this lever first. They're looking outside the window into the lobby. They're aware of what they're doing. I also placed the wire. I don't know if it's that distinguished, but it sparks when you pull the lever. And hopefully that kind of shows you that you've opened the door and then the ground shakes. And I want the player to continue looking out this window. As you will see, the Vortigaunts eventually get in. I was thinking of having them knocking on the door when you got into the lobby, but I just didn't implement that. But then this lobby out here becomes a combat arena, so to speak. But we'll get to that. And then this is a zombie that just so happens to open the door. Again, not a perfect solution, but at least it got the job done. So at least this door didn't just open by itself. I had to give some reason as to why the door opened. As I mentioned before, what I have done is I've created a loop, and this is us back kind of at the start of the loop. We can actually see out into the cafeteria area that I created before, and I made sure to make it very distinctive, as I said, with colours. Especially with this, the green of the security console. I'm not sure what's going on with these graphical glitches. But that, it's not doesn't affect the map too much. But it might actually just be my settings. But I made sure to make this room very distinctive. So when the player comes back around here from this kind of dark corridor, they know where they are. And this is where they can collect the weapons for the upcoming battle, because they've seen, as the player, you see the Vortigaunts going into the area. You know that there's going to be a battle. But I wanted to, to somewhat surprise the player, because the player's expecting Vortigaunts, but not here. They're expecting the Vortigaunts going through this area. Obviously here, in order to open the door, I've just placed this button. It's a very lazy solution, but I kind of, had to have some way of unlocking it, because obviously it was locked from the other side. So pushing the button and going through. I wanted to surprise the player, as I said. So I had that, Vortigaunt spawning behind the counter, and it kind of surprises the player, because the player is familiar with this area. They don't expect that to happen. But it's kind of at this point that the map goes from being this eerie, environment, the feeling of isolation, to being somewhat of a traditional Black Mesa level. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. Where's my grenades? I think I got all of them. Whilst I like the concept of this lobby becoming an arena, I don't think the way I executed it was particularly good. In fact, I think I did a very bad job of utilising the space as a combat arena. And I think what a lot of players do is they'll just take the battle from here, because the moment they walk out, for some reason, all of the Vortigaunts are just gathered around there. I did try and space them out, but they all seem to kind of congregate in this area. And a lot of players will use these doors as, cover, and they're a pretty good cover, because then the doors close after 4 seconds or so. And the player can kind of lob grenades, and, there's these vending machines which give you health. I actually just copied and pasted vending machines from, a questionable ethics VMF, because it's so much of a hassle to have to set up each one of these buttons and, hit, that all that logic. So I, just copied them. I shamelessly admit, but the battle, is often, players just hang back and take the battle from here. But a good combat arena utilises all the areas. So what I maybe should have done is had 1 or 2 Vortigaunts here. Maybe had one spawning up there and maybe limited some to only being here. Because obviously at this point we're the player's full forward bound to go through the exit door, which isn't the exit door for the level, by the way. It's the exit door into the next area. Another thing is it's quite difficult to find cover in this area, but I didn't want to just spam cover. I think I kind of, in that instance, moved over here, and even moving over here I couldn't find any cover. Using this as cover is quite good. I think these plants are very obstructive, to be honest, and I actually tried to dial back the plants. This type of plant was actually placed on these, but it just meant you couldn't even see that door because, you know, the big plant was there. So that's why I removed it, so the player could get a line of sight there. But I feel like I could have done a lot better with this combat arena. And this was part of the transition from my map, or the level, becoming a Halloween-themed Eerie Isolation map to becoming a traditional Black Mesa level. And this is, I think, why the map didn't do much better than it did. And I agree. It's because I started off with one idea, incorporated a little bit of it and didn't get there. Then I tried this whole imposter stuff, which, by the way, at this point, I just didn't really continue to build upon. I then, from this point, as I was developing it, because I'd kind of done all of this, I'd made it, I then needed to, you know, do the next bit. So it was kind of done in sections that up until this point was done. It wasn't fully completed, obviously. I still did a bit of detailing, a bit of tweaking, added some stuff. But when I did this, and I added in the Vortigaunt fight, which was there from the start, basically, I then had to design these new areas. And yeah, so this is the kind of transition from Halloween map, as I'll call it, although it's not scary, but, you know, Halloween map to traditional map. And that's a lot of the downfall of the level's, you know, enjoyment, I think. This is another instance where I give the player 2 routes to take, and the player doesn't know what they'll find at, you know, either one. So obviously the player can kind of see a lab, and, you know, it kind of looks a bit more spacious. You know, this route to the left kind of looks a bit darker, and maybe the player wants to explore that because it's a bit more mysterious. But it's completely up to the player, and no matter which route they take, they'll always come across the same things, basically. But it almost creates this feeling of unease for the player as they're not sure where to go. Like, back here, I made it clear where the player has to go here. It's good to show the player that, or to give the player the feeling of unease. It's maybe not, you know, that they have to just pick a side and go there. Let's use this gun because it's probably better for long range. So yeah, I did the Bullsquid in because at this point I was adding in more traditional enemies. I wanted to kind of vary things. I didn't want there to be Vortigaunts forever. And I think this kind of corridor plays very well into this combat scenario. You can actually duck down, and actually if you duck here, he'll probably still get you with the gunge and goo and spit. But I think it's a fairly good corridor for having a Bullsquid fight encounter. So that's what happens if you go to the left, and you can continue to go around, but I'll approach it from this side because I think it's better. Or if, you know, if the player goes right first, this is what they'll encounter. So if you approach from that side, these enemies will still spawn, except the Vortigaunt that spawns down there will spawn up here. So I tried to make it so that you're always at a distance from the enemies, that you never walk through, if it's a long range enemy, so if it's a Marine or an HECU soldier, or if it's a Vortigaunt, any enemy that has long range attack, I always try to make sure the player is as far enough away from them that they don't get overwhelmed, or because it's not a lot of fun. Obviously, if you're close to it, you need to be kind of close up to zombies because they're short range enemies and they can only get you, so it kind of gives them a chance as much as their NPCs, if you know what I mean. So this was one of these instances in which with this Vortigaunt, I put him behind the glass so that he couldn't just run straight up to you. Now, in that scenario, it didn't play out as maybe I would have hoped. Maybe I should have, blocked off this area, maybe put an NPC clip here so he couldn't just run out there. But I guess Vortigaunts are, AI is programmed to chase the player down because they do kind of have a short range attack where they kind of stomp the ground and it cascades out. I'm not entirely sure what you call it. I'm sure some Half-Life lore fans know. I'm sure some of you know, but so there is kind of short range attack that they have, but I would prefer them to be at a distance, and that's why they kind of spawned at a distance here. I also made sure to add quite a lot of ammo off the beaten track, as I spoke about before, and this rewards the player. So the next combat encounter, they will have ammo. But if you're one of the players who kind of speeds forward and is just desperate to finish the map, it'll be a bit more harder for you, and because you won't have enough ammo. And I often find a lot of people say, oh, there's not enough ammo, when in fact they don't just look for it. And there is. Sometimes, there isn't enough ammo, and certain points in this mod I maybe didn't balance it as well as I could have. But in this scenario, I think it does quite well at giving you a lot of items. And these bathrooms are basically just, somewhere for the player to have a look round. Also, another artifact. I don't know why they stopped spinning after a while. They should all be spinning, but I think if you, I don't know. I think after a while they just stop. But there's not really anything to find here. But in here, there's actually health. So for players who, find this area, they can find some health and ammo. Ideally, what I wanted was that I would want this elevator to be where this containment lockdown door is. So when the player, if the player chooses to go right here, they can see the route to go. So this is, even though they can't see it from here, they're then rewarded by seeing the elevator. But one problem I've got into in the past with creating Black Mesa levels is I create big areas next to each other, and they are very that's very unoptimized. And I'd say most of the Black Mesa maps I've created that I haven't released were because I've created very unoptimized levels that I've tried to optimize, and there's always graphical glitches and stuff like that. And they're very difficult to fix without making huge changes or just starting again. So I kind of learned my lesson, and I made sure that no two areas could really be seen from each other. So, and that's why the elevator is here. I did try and kind of up the environmental look with these areas, because by definition this corridor is a connecting area, and I've always said, if you've watched my previous videos, that there should be no such thing as a connecting area. The player should always have something to do. There should always be something to find, or puzzles or something, and the player should never just be running through a corridor. So that's why the combat was here. But I also tried to make the environment look a lot better. So I added in, I tried to make the shadows look a bit better, and add in glow sticks to kind of make the place more colourful. And the exit, of course, I as I did with the door back there, I always try to make the main route very obvious for the player to go through. So, yes, so we come to this elevator part, and most players, when they push an elevator button, expect the elevator to be there, the doors to open, the elevator to be there, and them to get inside. But here, I wanted to shake things up a little bit. And this was just kind of a funny, unique thing for to happen to the player. As this was a kind of Halloween, non-serious map, I kind of wanted something for the player to, something to surprise the player. And then this also gives way to the next obstacle, which is this jumping part. Now, I think if you're not used to the source movement, or the kind of source way of navigating and traversing the world, this jump can actually be quite difficult. And I actually saw some people saying this jump was too difficult to make, and I think that's probably is the case. If you're not used to the source movement, it's very difficult. So I do apologise for that. I don't even know if I'm going to make it. But my initial idea was that the elevator would start falling if the player was here and then started running to do kind of a big run down this corridor. But I thought it was better if the elevator just fell immediately, and that would be part of the sequence. So you really do need to crouch jump, and I think I did put a HUD hint there to help people, but it probably is too far, and if I were to update this, I would probably make it slightly more easier. So as I mentioned before, I really got tired of making these laboratories and offices with the questionable ethics theme, and I wanted to shake that up, and this is the kind of part of the mod that I did that, and I really kind of enjoyed doing a new theme, and it also helps this place be a bit more distinctive for the player. The players up till this point has just seen corridors that it looks similar to that, but here I kind of made it look a bit different, put these billboards on the wall, and it's a bit mysterious. It starts off light here, but then it kind of goes a bit dark, and then at the end of this corridor there's a combat encounter with Houndeyes, and you can take them out one at a time if you want, but there's a trigger here that if you hit this trigger, they'll jump up and start chasing you, or run after you, and I wanted to give the player a false sense of hope that they could somehow make that jump to escape them. So obviously the player is running back. Probably the shotgun's the best weapon for them, because they're very, very short range. And I don't know if this corridor is potentially wide enough. I maybe should have made it a bit wider to give the player more ability to navigate it and escape the Houndeyes. But yeah, so I kind of wanted to give the player a false sense of hope and close the elevator doors as they were running to them. It creates a point of no return, so the player, I think from that point, the player could return to the start of the level. But I wanted, it's always good to kind of keep the player moving forward. And this kind of brings us to a new part of the level. So here we see another instance of two different routes that the player can take, and the player has no idea which one they should. Now, the difference with this choice is that both routes actually do lead to different things, both of which are actually tied together. So you need to go to both of these routes, both of these areas. But wherever you go to first, it doesn't matter, because wherever you go to first, you will then have to work out, that you then need to go to the other, through this other door. So there's a lot of going back and forward. And this is what I was speaking about earlier, squeezing as much gameplay out of an environment as possible. And that's what I do here. I guess I'll just go to the right. There's a lot of kind of lighting glitches. I think I could have used block lights to ensure that this red didn't get through. Anyway, here is another security station, and if the player, I think it's more beneficial perhaps for the player to come here first if they, in terms of working out how to solve this puzzle, because this puzzle involves quite a bit, and it's not difficult. But this is a push crate puzzle I spoke about before, but I changed it to make it kind of, to accommodate for both these routes that the player can take. So if the player is to test, then they can see, one door opens, the other one closes, and there's that push crate, which I'm hoping people understand what to do with it. And then the player then has to find the way around. And this bit's green because it's the, main route to go. Because I did try and color code these two routes to make them different. Like there's a green glow stick and a red glow stick, and just to kind of help to distinguish them for players, And this wall was initially red, but there was a lot of glitches here that lighting glitches and stuff, so I kind of just made it all this texture, which was one of the final fixes I did before quickly submitting. And this is the introduction of the HECU, or, well, we did have them before at the very start, but this is the introduction into, as, they're involved in the kind of gameplay. And this was going to be, there was going to be a lot more HECU around this area, and that was just kind of the first part of it. I'll explain the rest when we get back round, but this push crate puzzle isn't very difficult. And I couldn't get this working first, because when the player would push the button, I was just checking you couldn't do it through the window. When the player would push the button, the door would push this crate through the floor. So I had to look into the VMF for BM Oasis, which was made by Mackie, which I think it was the same kind of puzzle, and you had to go and push a button, and it used I think a funk move linear, and that's kind of how I solved that problem, because otherwise this crate would be pushed through the floor, and this door wouldn't stay open for the player to crawl under. So obviously the HECU soldier we saw is gone. I kind of wanted that to be a bit more, a bit unnerving for the player. This was another one of the Halloween things. I kind of realised I was going too much into traditional gameplay here, so I wanted to create more of a scary environment. And one thing I did was I placed these lockers here, and initially the player wouldn't be able to get into them. And when the player would push this button, obviously they solve the puzzle. They can now see they can get under there and progress. But when the player pushed that button, these three lockers would open simultaneously, and there would be HECU soldiers in all of them, and the player would have to fight them all. Now, I didn't even attempt this, but because I thought that it wouldn't be very much fun, because it's kind of a small area, and also I was kind of running out of time to add new things. But that was the reason why these lockers were placed here. But at the end of the day, they just provide a place to find, ammo and to explore, so you can kind of see Doggo. And also, again, I don't know why it stopped spinning. It should be spinning, but I saw in the console there's a problem with them, but they don't break. It just makes it look weird. And that never happened when I was yeah, that didn't happen when I was when it was playtested or when I was developing it. Anyway, I did add in another HECU encounter here, and this was to create a dynamic environment, because obviously when you go through a corridor, you've gone through the corridor and then that's fine, it's static. But to give the impression of this being being Black Mesa under occupation, I added in 2 HECU soldiers just going about their normal business. And this is a very interesting thing to add for the player, or it's an interesting thing for the player to see, because often when you play through mods and games, all the enemies you come across are just facing you. You walk into a room and all the enemies are just there, and that's kind of what it's been like with this so far. But having these soldiers just walking and talking makes it feel like a more dynamic level, and you can choose how you interact with them. So obviously they go up these stairs and you can actually follow fairly close behind them without them doing anything. You can get the jump on them as the player, so you choose how to interact with them, well, up until this point when you walk in here, and then they'll notice you. So yeah, I feel like what I should have done is have them have a conversation here, maybe about the push crate being stuck in the door, something like that. Again, I just didn't have the time, unfortunately, but that's something I would include. And again, when the player comes through this door, maybe they don't notice, and the player can then choose on how they'd want to interact. So obviously I could throw a grenade and try and take both of them out, but then that would alert them. Just having dynamic stuff in the level like that makes it a lot more interesting and makes it a lot more fun for the player. Alright, now we come to the final kind of lobby, but there's quite a lot to this. And I put that light in there to draw the player's attention to this. To that horrible death scene. I'm sorry if you're squeamish about this stuff. But what that was this is a teaching mechanic that there are in fact lasers here, and they are in fact deadly. So if I go up in the elevator now, we die. So that's what this was, and that was one of the reasons why these windows are here, is so you can see the danger. Also, the windows are here just to show you that this is the exit. This is the definitive exit, and that this is where you're aiming for. And I made sure this was front and center when you enter the room. So I tried to put as few distractions here. This bridge is actually a big distraction And actually, I considered, and I am now considering, kind of making it broken so the player can see the elevator the whole time. But, in any case, you can, I wanted this to be front and center, and I tried to make it so that the player didn't automatically run this way or run this way. Although there are stuff there to there is stuff there to collect, but to make it clear, this is where you need to go. I did light up the signs and also the exit sign. Initially, these were all very distinguished, and the player could see them, but in one of the final compiles, I actually upped the brightness in this room, and I actually made it too bright. So now it kind of loses the eerie atmosphere because it's just too bright, and these lights were quite good. It looked much better, and now it kind of doesn't look too great. But again, it was one of the final compiles, and I didn't go back to fix it because there was more important stuff that I had to consider. But one day I might go back and fix this. So the player is immediately shown the exit. They know what to do, but their job is to somehow disable the lasers, and hopefully that's obvious. You can kind of see different areas of of the map, but if it's not clear, it should hopefully become clear to the player. And I just think this, or I wanted to design this lobby area as interesting as possible with much verticality, because there hasn't been too much verticality in this level so far, in that it's not really been used, minus a few kind of the jumping puzzles and whatnot. I wanted to really utilize it in terms of scale and, in like a big combat arena like this. If you look through this window, you can see the third Gordon Freeman ragdoll, and this is, was placed in at the very end just to kind of remind the player what's going on. But if you've noticed, just watching this video, there hasn't been any more incorporation of this concept of imposter, and that's the name of the mod. And again, I went too far in the traditional Black Mesa gameplay direction, and I should have stuck with the Halloween theme. And if you look at some of the other entries into the Escape from Black Mesa, the good thing about them is they take this Halloween theme and they roll with them throughout the entire thing, constantly enforcing them, and it's all very good. But here, that's not what happens. And that's one of the reasons I think why my map didn't do better. And I fully agree. I think I should have done more for this imposter kind of storyline. There's also this guy just hanging up here. I wanted that to be a bit ominous. Again, this room's a bit too bright now to to create a scary atmosphere. And I'm not saying darkness equates to horror. I'm not saying, because a lot of the other maps I played or saw screenshots of, they were very dark and there wasn't any lighting in the darkness to complement it. But here, I ensured that these signs and the lighting here and the lights up here really did complement the darkness. You can also see into this area, which is where we'll be coming out of. But I made sure to hide that with one of these dividers. Also, I'm not sure if you can just jump up to one of these levels. That was my biggest fear, is I didn't want players jumping up, and initially there were a lot more props around here, but there was like a panel here that the player could jump on and get up there, so I kind of just removed most of the props. I wanted to add a kind of precursor to the HECU combat. I wanted to add something a bit more static, and of course that is with these turrets, who are very, very quick. But when you introduce something like turrets, you always want to give the player a chance. You always want to alert the player to the turret's existence, because there's nothing worse than when you're playing through a mod and you start getting shot instantly and you have no kind of way to get out, and you take damage unfairly. You know, when you take damage, you always want, you know, at least, you know, if you do take damage, it's always your fault or your inability, if you know what I mean, as a player, for the most part. So I put these head crabs here to kind of alert the player to the turret's existence, and they'll always stay activated. Got both of them, which is quite good. I don't think it's a particularly good turret encounter, because you're actually facing away, and then you come round here, and then this is the only view of them, and it's a very small space. This corridor was actually designed before the turrets were placed, and that, I think, is my downfall. Is when you design combat, you really want to be designing the combat first, and a lot of the arena outside was done that way, but this particular corridor was, as I would say, a connecting area that I had to give the player something to do. So when we go out of this door, that's when the kind of fighting begins, and you'll hear a VOX line. There's a couple of VOX announcements that are quite funny, and they're directed towards, you know, either the HECU talking about us, or, you know, they're directed to us. And that was just to kind of, you know, as a bit of humour, but also to enforce the whole Gordon Freeman imposter narrative. And also, I try, when you'll see when I go through the door, I'm not doing it yet because I'll play through it in one kind of go, so you can see me playing it, so I'm not talking and playing. But you'll see I try and keep the HECU soldiers at a distance, and that they're not running right up to you all the time. They might do. The AI is very, well, you don't always know what the AI is going to do all the time. So sometimes they'll run up, but they should stay at a distance and allow us to back down if we want to. So this is the first kind of battle. I'll acknowledge a lot of these problems that you're seeing with the battle in a minute. So pretty much every single problem with this battle was demonstrated. First of which is, I think these plants are very obstructive, and I really do like this. I kind of like these plant zones, but for fighting this guy along here, it's actually very difficult to see him, especially if you're crouching down. And these do give you cover, but the plants kind of obstruct vision, so that's one of the major downsides. But I do like the different islands that I've created. I've created Island 1, Island 2, Island 3 and Island 4, and there's one of these soldiers spawns on each one of them, and the VOX announcement kind of announces their presence, and you can see the guy running out there. I placed dividers here as temporary cover, so they cover you for a bit, but then after a while, if they're shot enough, they'll break. And I quite like this because it makes kind of a dynamic environment. So we've got some across there, and that's kind of the same concept. And one of the soldiers spawns behind there, so you can kind of, you know, he's got a bit of the cover as well, as, you know, as do we. But looks like there's a HECU soldier glitching through that door, but we'll get to that. So yeah, the main issue is the visibility issue. But also, I feel like these dividers make it very enclosed as well. And you maybe should be able to see more of this area. So that's something I would change. But there's possibly an NPC clip here. I can't remember if I removed it, but that kind of stopped this guy from just straight up running up to us. Also, I'm just not the best at combat, so anyway, we'll go and get the last artifact. As you'll notice, Gordon Freeman Ragdoll is gone, but by this point, there's no point. And then the player has to walk all the way back up again, but that's alright. And then when I cross this bridge, these doors are supposed to open and the HECU soldiers are supposed to run out immediately. Like now, they're supposed to be running out. But they only seem to run out when I get, up to a certain point. And that, I tried to fix them because they use like AI goal and rally points and stuff like that. Which I used a lot when I created Cosmonaut, and they all work very well, but using them here, just in this instance, it just didn't seem to work very well. I am aware of the lack of health around this area. Obviously we've got the charger here, but if, because obviously when I'm playing, I know where the enemies are. I kind of know where they're coming from and what they're going to be like. A lot of players who play on hard will run out of health very quickly because of that, and this bit is particularly challenging, and that has been one of the points of feedback that I've been given directly. And yeah, I fully admit I didn't do well at balancing this. And this was all done very late on, so anyone who had played, I tested kind of the first bit, but this last bit was barely tested at all, which was a mistake I made. But parts of it didn't turn out too bad.
You will be terminated.
As you heard, there was another Vox line there just to, surrender Gordon. That's what it was saying. So, and it was kind of to tie into the imposter, theme, but it doesn't really do that. It kind of just makes people confused. But the fact it's addressing us directly, there's something very unnerving about that. It's like in Half-Life Alyx when the Combine start calling to Alex. Like that bit was that bit kind of freaked me out a bit. In this combat scenario, you fight the first guy and I kind of ensure there's plenty of cover. And when you get up to this, again, they're supposed to run out into the central point, but they just seem to hang back. But I made sure there was enough cover. You can actually hide behind, these bushes, and there's, vis blockers here. So if there was a guy standing here, he wouldn't be able to see you standing on that side. And I made sure this wasn't obstructing that view. And yeah, throughout the whole, all the way around, you can always see this central elevator, and, the yellow lights hopefully highlight it and make sure you're constantly, looking for, looking at it and acknowledging it. And then for the final HECU soldier, I wanted something a bit different. So I have him with a RPG. He only seems to have a one-time use on the RPG, you'll know. Not entirely sure why, but it's not a particularly difficult battle unless you're, I know some people will just run towards and then it open and then that'll kind of catch them off guard, but it's not particularly difficult. It's not a particularly difficult battle. Alright. This is the server room, which I quite like. I quite like this bit. And the premise here is the combat has now stopped. The fighting has stopped, and this is mainly, I wanted the player's attention to turn back to removing these lasers, to disabling the lasers, and that's why this kind of great window is here. Again, this is similar to the one back in the initial fire door puzzle. But I want to make it clear that this is now the player's main focus. So you can see that there. And you can also kind of see down there. I spoke about earlier about the HUD hints. As you see here, we have the HUD hints appearing for throwing and rolling grenades. And this was one of the examples given to me that actually just gave away the solution as opposed to helping. Because by this time the player's probably thrown a grenade. And, having that kind of means the player doesn't really need to think for themselves here. They do a bit, the puzzle is still there, but it kind of takes a step out of it. I don't know if that's clear enough, but you can kind of see the lever down there. And you can also see the lasers. So I'm hoping that the player understands that they're trying to get to this area. And that will disable the lasers. Now, how these lasers were set up by the HECU and the soldiers, I have no idea. That's not something we really... that's not something I really had to think about. And, I guess I wanted the gameplay. I invented the gameplay. And, I don't think it's unlikely that the HECU would place lasers here to stop Gordon Freeman from escaping from Black Mesa. Anyway, so we've come to this puzzle, which I tried to keep, fairly clean. This isn't a very detailed part of the room, or the level. But I did make it so that you can see the exploding barrels, you can see the vent, and then you can also see this vent up here. And if you want to try, you can aim from up here. Maybe it's much easier to aim from up here, and then that blows the door wide open. Incidentally, if you spend a long time here, so I think it's 2 minutes, and if you don't get that puzzle completed in 2 minutes, grenades will start spawning out here to help, So if the player was to use up every single one of their grenades and not get it through that hatch, they'd go out that door eventually, hopefully, and that would provide them with more grenades. But that only occurs if you've been here for longer than 2 minutes, and then every minute after that it spawns a new grenade. But in this vent, there's actually a trigger push to help the grenades. So even if you were to throw a grenade softly or completely miss, the trigger push will always get the grenade out the other side. So the whole, you have to be a really bad shot to miss all the grenades I provide. But, I'm not saying it's unlikely, and I always like to make allowances for that. So even though it's not very realistic that grenades will just randomly spawn out here, yeah, there we go. And hopefully they've stopped spawning now. Now we've completed it. I don't know though. That's something that was added quite late on. But I can go back and, I don't know, have a look, fix it. So then this is us, we've eventually made it to disabling the lasers, and again this thing has helped us see what we're doing, so we're always aware, because otherwise we wouldn't know, if this wasn't here we wouldn't know what we were doing. We'd maybe be able to hear the lasers, but if we can't see them we aren't certain, so I tried to make it abundantly clear to every single player that this lever disables lasers. Again, no idea how the HECU set this up, or, you know, why they bothered to, but you know, fun comes first. And this is another example of the fact I wasn't able to find another way for the player to find their own way out of a room that had to be locked initially, that I just had another zombie breaking through. And again, I think it's not the best that I could have done, but it's what I did, and it kind of, you know, helps. This vent was kind of placed in quickly last minute because, again, as I spoke about vents, they shouldn't really, you know, you shouldn't have a lot of vent crawling and all that, but it does help us get to the bottom levels so we can go back round to the elevator. I spoke earlier about the HECU walking through that corridor, and you as a player were, you know, they weren't focusing on you. This is another one of those instances where there's a enemy. There's this H.E.V zombie. And, you know, it's not attacking you. It's not going to attack you. It's behind the fence. But you as a player can decide how you want to take it out. It's also kind of a bit kind of unnerving to see. But this is kind of introducing the H.E.V or H.E.V zombies to the player, which, because of it's the end of the mod, it kind of feels a bit invalid that we're introducing zombies, but it does kind of bring back a little bit of the horror aspect of the, you know, of the level, and that's kind of what I wanted, you know, is to have this kind of red litten room, and you can take them out as if you know, how you want. So yeah, I just wanted to add something else here. I didn't want the route to the exit to be fully, you know, just the player running. That's why I did this bit. You know, you can drop here and then jump over here and then crouch under here. The player's always doing something, and then, you know, this guy to deal with, and then yes. Again, it does feel very invalid to add zombies in at the very end. Usually when you play custom Half-Life 2, Half-Life Black Mesa levels, the last thing you fight is a boss. So it would be a chopper or the gargantua or something like that. But in this regard, it's zombies. Because I didn't want a cliched boss battle at the end of this. As much as as much as a lot of this map has been traditional Half-Life 2 Black Mesa gameplay, I kind of just wanted, you know, I'd rather go for the horror over the, you know, having a boss battle. So that's kind of what I did here. Again, placing a nice green glow stick there to show you that this button will open the door and yeah, or unlock the door. Again, not a perfect solution, but you know, it just had to be done.
Gordon,
So I added that in for a kind of comedy, because of course the name of the competition's Escape from Black Mesa, so that was just something to entertain players and the judges. I think my initial idea, because I spoke about boss battles, was that you'd come up here and there'd be some more HECU soldiers, Marines to fight. But at this point, I just wanted to get the player into the elevator and then, to the end of the level. Because it is a very long mod, and I was aware because there was a minimum of 10 minutes of gameplay required for each map. And at the start, when I started making this, I was concerned because I've seen people play through my levels and they just run through the level. So I was quite concerned that, I'm sure you can get through this in less than 10 minutes, but I wanted to ensure that there was enough gameplay there to meet that criteria. I think I probably put too much in, to be honest, but yeah, overall, it's good that some of these areas are explored multiple times. Well, as you come around here, we're now back in this area. We're now back, and we could always see this elevator. So, yeah. And the idea is I'd run into the elevator and we'd see, the Marines firing at us down there. But, yeah, I didn't bother adding it in. Okay, so now we come to the end of the level. And this is probably my least proudest moment. Or I'm not very happy with this ending, basically. I wasn't sure how I was going to end it. This ending was very last minute, as was a lot of things that ended up being defining factors of this level. But I wasn't sure how I was going to end it, because I had the initial idea of a creature chasing us, and then the imposter Freeman. I wasn't sure how I was going to wrap any of that up. So I decided that I was going to just scrap all that and have a completely random ending. That didn't make any sense. And I wanted to, because obviously the theme is Escape from Black Mesa, and I think one of the kind of criteria was that the player had to escape, and that's what I did here. I don't know, how do I zoom? Yes. And it kind of, I wanted to give the impression of that those being windows that the player will, go through it. I know it kind of looks a bit weird because it's very bright light, but I wanted to kind of give the player a false sense of hope that, oh look, this is the way out. So I kind of put an outside area there, so if you for players who see it, maybe for like 1 second or half a second, they'll believe that those are actually windows. But if you start walking towards it, you'll see that this is not the case. And I also took inspiration from Prey 2017, in which, spoiler alert, you have to break through the glass and then you find out you're not in the location you want to be, or you think you are, and that's kind of what I did here. Because you walk into this area and you see, there's nothing, and this elevator goes down and you cannot bring that back up, so you're soft locked here. And if you look out here, you can clearly see that this is just these are just glass pictures. So I want the player to break through here.
Hello, Dr. Freeman.
This was completely random. It doesn't really mean anything. And then it says imposter. Incidentally, if you don't break the glass, after 2 minutes, the map will just end. In fact, the scientists will start saying stuff to, draw your attention that there might be something behind the windows. But if you don't break the glass, it'll just end. Just because I, couldn't find a way to get the player to hit the glass. And obviously, if you text will show no matter how many artifacts you collect. So if you get no artifacts, it'll say 0 out of 6 artifacts, and hopefully that would spark the player's interest to play it again. Because I do like replayability, and sometimes when I play through levels again, I get a better idea of the levels. I actually appreciate levels more if I play them twice. So a lot of Black Mesa custom levels I will play multiple times. And I want to encourage other people to play my level multiple times, because I spent many hours making it. Many early mornings were spent trying to make this level just right for the player, so that everyone who comes to play, there'll be something in it for everyone, and that whether you like combat or puzzles or scary environments, that there would be something in there for you. So, to conclude, in conclusion, I'm very happy with Imposter as a general traditional map, and it's got a lot of great stuff in it, but as a Halloween-based level, I'm not really happy with how I went about starting to execute these ideas and then not following through on them or not finishing them. But I'm really happy with it. I'm really happy with the feedback that I've received, both positive and negative. There wasn't anything like really, really bad that made me want to never make a map again yet. The judges seem to enjoy it. The map scored 4th place, which is it was really kind of funny, because I was saying to someone that I actually wanted a new keyboard, and the keyboard was the 3rd place prize. So I said, I'm going to make a map that's not good enough to score 1st, but good enough to score 3rd. And ironically, I got 4th, which meant I didn't get any prizes. I missed out on the grand prizes, but the point in me doing this wasn't just for the prizes. The prizes might have kind of pushed me to start making it, or may have been one of the factors. I always have great joy in making levels for the Half-Life games and for Black Mesa. I just it's a hobby that I really like to do, and I know that a lot of you who are watching this like to see the stuff I make and like to play the stuff I make, and I thank you for supporting the channel and supporting me as a map creator. And thank you to everyone who playtested and who's been playing the map since the release, and thank you to all those who are watching this video, and to those who hosted the competition.